So we're going to start talking about the Medicaid plan. Hi, everybody. Hi, PJ. Hi, Sandy. Glad you're here. And the Medicaid plan that Republicans introduced just yesterday, sort of. So why don't we start out? Everybody who's joining us, this is Andrea Ducas. She is from healthcare expert from Center for American Progress. And as soon as Republicans dropped this plan, I started looking at blue sky posts from people in your organization because Center for American Progress is always sort of the first place I look. And if anybody doesn't follow them, they should. They do amazing analysis. You guys did amazing work building up to the election, trying to warn people about Project 2025. Yeah, really great organization. They're doing a great webinar, I think later this week, about the Trump administration's effect on food policy and food availability and food safety in our country. But for now, what I wanted to do was do a really deep dive, or not, the deepest, but like a somewhat deep dive on what exactly is in this Medicaid plan. I talked about it yesterday in my live a little bit, but I'm not a healthcare policy expert, and you are. And so I think what people really want to hear is sort of the big, um, maybe the flagship parts of what they're proposing, and then just talk to us a little bit more. I don't even want to tell you what to say. Talk to us about this bill. What were your initial reactions when you saw it? And how are you describing it to people when you have to give them sort of a 3 minute, like, here's the top lines? What are you saying? We'll start with that.
Yeah, great question. Well, just in terms of the top lines, I mean, the bill with respect to Medicaid would enact the biggest cuts to the Medicaid program in the program's history. The net effect of the bill, plus some additional policies that are already underway by the Trump administration and Congress failing to extend the extra help that people get to buy their coverage on the marketplaces. If you combine all of that, you're looking at 14 million more people uninsured as a result of the provisions
Right.
of the bill. So when I first saw it, just to back up for folks who are watching this, right, Congress is going through a budget reconciliation process, right? They're developing these budget bills in different committees. They're all going to get marked up in their committees, and they're going to go and go through a pretty extensive process before they get on the floor for a floor vote. But this is the precursor to it. If what's in here is successful, that's sort of like my comments are predicated on that, right? If this
Right.
bill here's what we're going to see. So my first reaction when I saw the bill, I was grateful that it wasn't even more extreme. This is a
Mm,
very bill, but I was grateful not to see things in there like capping the federal dollars that go to states to help them pay for Medicaid coverage, or reducing the percentage in this federal state partnership that has always been the case for the Medicaid program, like just reducing that level and forcing states into an impossible position. I was grateful to see that.
Is that the, excuse me, is that the F map? Is that how you say it?
Yes,
F
it's
map?
so the Medicaid is financed through a combination of state money and
Hmm.
money, and there's a formula that by law, right, dictates how much money goes from the federal government to states. So the minimum amount's 50%, but it could be more or less. More, it can be more than that depending on your state's income.
Right.
Uh, and there's different percentages based on different populations within state Medicaid programs. But in any event, I was glad to not see those changes. There were a lot of things in here we had expected. So we had expected, first of all, for example, there to be paperwork requirements that House Republicans would want to impose on beneficiaries. So you'll hear these described as work requirements. These are
Hmm.
requirements that would force very poor people who are enrolled in state Medicaid programs to constantly validate either that they have a job, which by and large everybody who on Medicaid who can work already does. So they'd have to prove they have a job, or they have qualify for some sort of exemption. So we were expecting that. They did carve out a bunch of people, right? So parents, for example, I was surprised that parents were exempted, as it's a good thing. But again, you have to go through the process of validating and verifying that you qualify for that exemption, right?
Right.
The work requirements are in here. And what I like to remind people is the goal of this bill, right? If you listen to what House Republicans are saying, is to reduce federal spending, right? It's to reduce that's why all these healthcare cuts are in there. But if on the one hand you believe what you hear as the Republican talking point, which is, oh, we just want to encourage people to go to work. These work requirements are going to get people to work. Well, if that works and people don't lose their coverage, you don't save any money. Like the only way work requirements save money is if people lose their coverage.
Oh, that's a great point. That's well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So something we've been trying to sound the alarm about well before this bill hit the streets, I guess so to
Yeah.
speak, is work requirements cause massive coverage losses. That's the only point behind these. They're a solution in search for a problem, and it's just entirely wasteful. We know from state experiences that these are terrible. So there's work requirements in here imposed on um, many people who receive Medicaid. There's also some other really punitive elements of this bill, which were surprising to see. One is, so say you are on Medicaid, you have trouble for whatever reason, from one of probably many reasons, meeting this work requirement. You go and you can't get through the red tape. Well, not only are you not going to have Medicaid, but they would not allow you to get a tax credit to buy coverage on your own through the ACA marketplace. They would make you ineligible for the,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah. There's like, it's horrible, right? It's just a penalty to say, you know what? You can't have any coverage at all. So that's in this bill.
So wait, say that for me again. So if you apply for Medicaid but you don't qualify, they can take away your ability to get the tax credit?
Yes, if you don't qualify because you don't meet the work requirement, you
Okay.
are eligible for the premium tax credit to buy coverage on the exchange. That is in this bill.
Wow, that's
It's
unbelievable.
very
Okay.
buried in this like tiny little section on page 80 of this bill called other provisions, because I mean it's and there's no way to take that other than just like punishment, right? So anyway, that's in the bill. There's also, for the first time, language in the bill that would force states to charge copays and some form of cost sharing to Medicaid enrollees who are at or above 100% of the federal poverty line. So right now, states have the option to do that for some services. They can't do it for like emergency services, but this would actually require states to charge out of pocket costs to very, very, very low income people. They'd cap it at like $5,000 a year, or not $5,000, 5% a year of your income. That's a
Right.
lot of, if you are a poor person, if
Right.
you're on the poverty line.
Can you remind people what the poverty line, if you know off the top of your head, what is the poverty line in the United States right now? I believe well under 40,000 a year, right?
Oh yeah, it's even under 20. I think it's like $15,000. Let's see, for a single per no, yeah, $15,650 for a single person, or
Unbelievable.
$20,000 for a family of two. So if you're in a family of two making 21, a single parent family of two, $21,150, you could be forced to pay a copay to see a specialist, for example, which is insane to me. So that's another one of the provisions. This is kind of fun to be able to do that in real time. Um, there's another provision in here too, which is like just another example of tremendous overreach, which is to say, right now, again, like I shared, Medicaid is paid for as a partnership between the federal government and states, but states, as their own independent entities, can use their own money to pay for other things, right? There are some states, like I moved to Washington, D.C. from New Jersey, that choose to use their own money, no federal money at all, to offer coverage to undocumented children, right? So children, because they don't want to go, you want to make sure that kids are getting coverage, they're getting care, right? So, and it's not necessarily like, here's a policy for undocumented kids. We're just, as our policy for the subset of kids, we're just not even gonna ask about immigration status, right? So this bill would punish states who do that and say, hey, we're gonna ding the amount of federal dollars that go to you if you use any of your own money to make other decisions about how you want to provide coverage to your population, which is crazy. And then of course, the other sets of policies in here, which are designed to try to kick as many people off coverage as possible, is there's just a constant eligibility checks, constantly having to do more work to verify your income, shortening the amount of time that you can look back and get retroactive coverage. There's just everything that you could imagine that you could put in here to install a level of red tape to make it that much more likely that someone might not get coverage either at all or for a month or two here or there. It's in this bill.
It's like death by a thousand cuts, right? I mean, they're all pretty brutal cuts, but
Yeah.
and I think my understanding is there's really quite a lot of attacks on states and sort of trying to foist expenses back onto states so that is it am I correct in saying that states will end up cutting people off of Medicaid because they can't afford to cover them?
Well, they could. I mean, another thing that's in this bill is limitations on how states can. So there's another element of how states finance their Medicaid programs, which is they use a tool. Many of them use a tool called a provider tax, right, where they can put a tax on and use that money to bring in a federal match for the amount. Anyway, it's a little bit
Yeah,
technical, but it restricts how states are able to do that, right? And puts a freeze on existing provider taxes, and then there's some very technical elements in there that would influence how existing provider taxes work, and that's a tool that a lot of states use to make their benefits more robust.
right.
If you think about how much, so just to take a step back, right? Um, Before this bill came out, there was a really great study that a gentleman named Leighton Koo at George Washington University and his team put together that looked at what would happen just if work requirements were imposed, right? So they didn't have all the same exemptions that are in the bill, but it doesn't really matter, right? They put out an analysis that said if this happens, we're going to see millions of people lose coverage. As a result of that, there's going to be a major blow to state budgets because all of this federal money is going to disappear, right? And that could result in 500,000 jobs disappearing, right? Massive impacts on state budgets. Um, and if you think about that from the perspective of the state, right, like that's economic activity, that's money that is not there anymore, right?
Right.
So you think about the different types of choices you have to make as an or as a state government, right? Do you try to try to absorb those additional that missing those missing dollars by cutting services, by being more stringent with enrollment, by changing the way you do reimbursements, right? By
Right.
that's sort of the mental calculation you're going to have to go through if you're a governor or you're a state policymaker. You also think about what might happen if all of a sudden all these people who had insurance don't have it anymore, and you've got um, hospitals, especially rural hospitals that are operating on really, really, really thin margins, suddenly having their uncompensated care costs go up, right? So that's another worry, right? And if what you have to do in order to keep those places operational is award more dollars there, that's less money you can spend on other things. And that, I mean, and again, this is just one piece of this bill, right? There's
Right.
also cuts to food assistance, there's all sorts of other cuts
Right.
that hitting states at the same time.
Right. Right. Talk to me. Somebody said this is going to be especially hard on states that have Medicaid expansion enshrined in their constitutions. Is that true or was that not true?
Well, I mean, with for that would have been more of an issue if you were to see the federal rate drop.
Right.
So, and that is there is I guess an open question about how you're going to calculate what that match is depending on how about how it's written. But at any event, states who have Medicaid expansion in their constitutions are on the hook, right, for maintaining Medicaid expansion. And the harder you make it for them to do that, right, the harder it's going to be to pay for it. And it's not like they're in a state that can just say, you know what, forget it, we're just going to undo it. They're going to have to go through a constitutional amendment process to decide not to do it. So that's part of the rationale there. But um, we were before the bill came out, we're really concerned about what would happen if there were provisions in there that decreased the amount of federal funding going to states, because many states have laws on the book saying if that happens, they're going to undo their Medicaid expansion. But
Right.
obviously, you do that in a state where it's in your constitution. It's a little harder to amend a state constitution than it is to stop a legislative policy.
Right. And some of these Republican states, if I'm not mistaken, I think there are 14 states that have these trigger laws on the books, right? There
Well,
aren't they kind of they're like kind of wanting to get rid of Medicaid expansion. Like I think there are some states that would love to get rid of Medicaid expansion, right? Or are they
I mean, I don't think so. I mean,
no?
there are many states. Medicaid is you federal Medicaid dollars are a pretty significant source of state budgets.
Right.
Uh, I think what the reality they'd be living in is if all of a sudden that federal funding shrunk and we're on the hook for the entire tab. Yeah, we'd want to get rid of it because it's too much for us. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And okay, all this is like so fascinating. So, another question I had yesterday, and by the way, y'all drop questions in the chat if you have them. But somebody was asking how this was going to affect people with disabilities, and I actually did not know how to answer that question at all. So hopefully you do.
Yeah, this is a really tough question, and I will just, share. I get this question. I got it from my mother, right? My brother's he's intellectually and developmentally disabled. He's in a Medicaid group home, actually, in the state of Florida, and so you know, my family's concerned about this. The larger community that he's a part of is concerned about this. Um, there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. One is there are a lot of services that state Medicaid programs pay for that are not they're not like mandatory minimum services set by the federal government, right? These are wraparound services, like the funding for my brother's group home, right? That's not like a mandatory uh, funding line item that's supported by that's required of the state of Florida to provide with by federally from the Medicaid program. So I worry about what happens if all of a sudden states have less to spend on their Medicaid populations. I do worry about that. But with respect to some of the other policies here, right, like having to go through really extensive and constant eligibility verification processes, right? Like that, when you think about who's going to be harmed by that, it's people who don't have the time, the like technological skills and savvy, and the doggedness, right, to make it through the red tape. It's folks who have and I really like the time premium is really big, right? So
Yeah.
you're going to get wrapped up in that. And then, there are people obviously who qualify for Medicaid through a disability pathway, right? Their disability makes them eligible. And those are like, for the purposes of a bill like this, it'd be like a no brainer to say, well, they're not subject to these work requirements. But there are plenty of people with disabilities, functional disabilities, right, that are not on disability, right? They don't qualify through Medicaid that way, but they have disabilities that prevent them from working, and they would be caught up in this 100%, right? Unless they could prove it, they went through some sort of government process. I do worry about that as well.
Right. Right. And what about senior citizens? Isn't it about half of senior citizens who are in nursing homes are on Medicaid?
Medicaid is the biggest payer for long-term care services in the country.
Right.
Many parts of the country, that percentage is very, very high in terms of
Mm.
the source of payment. But yeah, I think that's another great example, right? There are quite a few dual eligibles in this country. That is, people with both Medicare and Medicaid. Um, Interestingly, there are some other elements of the bills that have popped up that would restrict the kinds of people who could qualify even for Medicare. That's separate, right? That there's very
Ooh.
strict immigration rules that would take some uh, lawful immigrants who are currently eligible for the program and make them ineligible, for example.
In this bill, in this Republican bill, really?
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, you worry about that again, right? Like for those people who are dually eligible, as an example, you're going to make them go through, you're going to make like a 90-year-old in a nursing home go through like constant eligibility checks. Like it's not, uh, everything about this bill is designed to make it as hard as possible to be enrolled in coverage.
Interesting. Okay, that is and talk for a second if you wouldn't mind about the connection between Medicaid and Medicare because I think we think of them as being totally separate programs, but there's quite a bit of overlap, am I right?
Yeah, for some people. So Medicare, right, is our program that's primarily when people think about Medicare, they think about senior citizens, right?
Right.
That program that you're every pe- assuming that you meet the like you've paid into Medicare for long enough, right? You become eligible for Medicare when you turn 65 by and large. But people also qualify for Medicare with some qualified disabilities.
Mm.
Medicaid is a program for low income people in this country, which also has disability qualifications that are tied also to income. But you can have both, right? Many older adults, especially those who wind up needing to be in assisted living or a long term nursing setting, right? Wind up dual eligible, right? Because Medicare doesn't pay for those things, right? It's not a long term care payer. So many people, I'm sure, have anecdotally heard stories about folks who've had to spend down their assets in order to qualify for Medicaid so that they could get long term coverage, and those folks would be on both Medicare and Medicaid.
And thank you for that. And speaking of which, isn't there also a provision in this that if your house is worth more than $1 million, you have to sell your house, right, in order to qualify for Medicaid now?
No, no, no. It's for Medicare. It's for the long term. I think it's for the long term coverage. Yeah, let me pull that up. Yes. Oh, no, 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 it's for Medicaid. Yeah. If you can have a maximum home equity of $1 million,
Right.
which
So
is
basically, anybody living in New York or California will
yeah.
have to sell their house before they can get Medicaid. Is that
Say you inherited it from your grandparent, right? Like you're living in a house
right?
that and they bought it for $50,000 45 years ago, and now because it was in Brooklyn it's worth $2 million. Yeah, you would. That's exactly what would happen. What happened if you needed to access Medicaid to get long term care? Yeah.
Right. Just all kinds of little little time bombs in there. Well, not time bombs, but there's just all these little places, and it is like we've talked about already, this death by a thousand cuts thing. Somebody had asked in the chat, is there any, I guess, is there anything good in this at all? And they had asked, like, is there any modernization? Are there any technological upgrades? Are they doing anything to actually improve healthcare for the most impoverished Americans, or is it all just cuts?
To improve healthcare? No, it's all just
No, sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's terrible, but okay.
no. If you look at, and again, there's different committees, right, that are putting out different bills,
Right.
or what's going to be this big beautiful bill. Um, in the Ways and Means text, there's a bunch of changes that are not about Medicaid or Medicare necessarily, but that would make that would make it more attractive to use health savings accounts. Right, these are like the accounts that accompany high deductible health plans that, by and large, low income people don't contribute to because they don't have piles of cash lying around, and so they don't use these as investment vehicles.
Right.
Um, so I guess if you're a rich person and you're looking to have your spouse who, because you had an HSA and they had an FSA, couldn't. I mean, like if you were a wealthy person, or if you were a moderate income person that had a lot of extra money lying around and wished that you could contribute more to a health savings account, there's some goodies in here for you.
Right. I remember reading about that, that is one particular Republican senator. I want to say maybe Ron Johnson, but I could be wrong. It's like their obsession with HSAs. So they really wanted to get it in. But yes, for the most impoverished Americans, like that's just,
Yeah,
yeah,
whether if you have $5 and you can, and instead of being able to contribute $400, you could contribute $500 to this investment vehicle. It doesn't matter to you.
right. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about that house, the $1 million house thing. If you put the house in a trust, is it protected? Do you have any idea?
I could not tell you.
Yeah, that's a question for an accountant, and I'm not even sure that the accountant would know because it seems like that's going to be subject to all kinds of yeah, it's
Well,
that
again, this is not actually the law.
that's right. That's
This
right.
kitty bill that's being marked up is like this is all of this is hypothetical. With like the goal here is to try to activate people to stop this thing.
Right. And that's in our just in our last couple of minutes. So we know they're doing markup, I think, right now,
Right.
unless it's done, right? Or I don't know, probably not done at all because
Not
they're no. Yeah. So they're in markup right now. My understanding, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I am, is that Republicans are probably not likely to adopt too many amendments to this, the healthcare portion, because they've already decided they have the votes to pass their section as it is, right? Or do you think they might change it?
I mean, we really don't know. We're going to see how the convers. We're going to see how the committee hearings or the committee markups sessions go today. Um, I think it's anyone's guess, really. We're
Okay.
already see, as I'm sure you're seeing in the news, right? Some folks complaining, including from the Senate, that it doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
Other folks saying, "Oh, maybe we ought to go back to the two bill strategy." So, I mean, we really don't know.
Okay. All right. If people want to watch that markup, the committee, where can they do that?
They can, right now, it's on my screen. Actually, I'll give you a little look. There
Yeah.
you go.
Do you know what website are you watching it? Is it
It's
house.gov or
energycommerce.house.gov. So,
energycommerce.house.gov?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And then just before I let you go, so where you people seem to feel like we can stop this bill. It's not a gimme that we're
yeah.
going to stop it, but we can. So
We
talk about that for just a minute before we stop.
Yeah, we absolutely can. Again, people did not vote for the president and Congress to cut the Medicaid program. And in fact, you hear President Trump talking about how he's not going to cut Medicaid. All of these people, the committee markup session began by with a Republican member saying they're all lying to you. We're not cutting the Medicaid program, right? That's not true, right? Like, it's in black and white. It's been easy for them to hide behind this idea that, like, oh, we're not voting for cuts. There's nothing. Medicaid's not even written in this bill. Well, now it is, right? It's
Right.
all there. The Congressional Budget Office. This is a nonpartisan entity. All they do is crunch numbers for Congress, right? They are the ones that showed the bill itself is going to kick like over 8.6 million people off coverage just in the bill, right? And then on top of that, you look at the additional effects that uh, current actions that are sort of already planned for are going to take, which gets you up to the $14 million person number. But this is not a popular bill. There's a reason that it took them this long to even get to markup, right? This was supposed to happen a couple weeks ago, and they couldn't make it. They couldn't get it done, right? So, call your members, stress that you're not interested in watching the poorest of the poor have their coverage ripped away from them. I do not think it's a given at all that this is going to pass.
I love that. Okay, good. So we have our marching orders, and we're just going to keep making those phone calls, and we will call every single day. And I think this is going to play out over months, right? Like we've got probably 2 months of this around.
Well, I mean, it could be really fast. I think it's in their best interest to try to move this as fast as possible. And they're hoping to get something on the floor before Memorial Day, right? So
That's the House, though, right? But then it's got to go over to the Senate.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, yeah, I mean, we want this to be as long and painful as possible. So,
That's right.
yes, if
That's
all
right.
goes well, this will take months.
That's what we want. All right, everybody, you have your marching orders, months. I cannot thank you enough for coming, Andrea. Excuse me. It's been really great to talk to you. I hope you will come back and talk to us again.
Of course.
Okay, good. We'll have you back on as this process, continues, and I will put a link to the CAP website in my in when I send this out to my whole list. And if you guys have follow up questions, let me know, and I'll pass them on to Andrea, and we'll see if we can't get a couple more answers. Thank you very much for the hard work you're doing. Thank you for fighting to protect healthcare for all Americans, and thank you guys for coming on. We'll see you soon. Bye.